Well, Doug, talking as we did in episode 915 about exercising the muscle of innovation. I'm curious to hear some of your habits here and how you have done that. How, again, as I talked about how they've changed somewhat as you've seen what's working. And like you talked about in the first show, questioning it. Is it working? If it's not, why am I doing this? So let's start off there, and we'll start off with physical and nutrition. And you gave me a little hint in the first show that the whole exercise part is not one of your favorite areas. Am I right?
It's not because I don't want it to be. It's just I've always struggled with it. And some of it is, I mean, it sounds funny, but I feel like when I turned 17 or 18, it's my level of energy as it just relates to physical stuff just fell off a cliff. And so I think in many ways, my last 20 years has been a yo-yo of different weights and physical conditions and all sorts of things. And I feel like I've, for the most part, gotten a good handle on the nutritional side of it.
Yeah.
But it's just been, I think the exercise part has been more difficult for me.
So as you're asking that question that you talked about in the first show of the why behind it, what is your avatar of a motivator of why do it? You don't enjoy it. It's never been a fun thing. So what is pushing you to even consider an investment in it?
I don't like feeling sluggish.
Yeah.
I think some of this is, so much of my life is cerebral. Like I do a lot of work in my head when I'm working with teams and with leaders. It's mental work, and some of it is I can feel when my mind is not working as fast as it should be because of decisions that I have made physically. But some of it is I do enjoy I'm exceptionally competitive, and I remember a time in my life when I played competitive tennis. And I played pickup basketball almost every single day. And I think some of it has been, as you get older, as you have kids and things like that, like the availability of time is so much less.
Yeah.
That I always did those things except for competitive tennis, just organically. It was just, I had time for it. I enjoyed it. And that's just, for whatever reason, it's not something that I've ever, I've been able to grasp onto in a intentional way. It also intersected with, I didn't know, I had a adult onset asthma, and I didn't know that I had it for 15 years. Wow. And so some of it was when I would start to re-engage, it was just really difficult because I would get winded so fast. And I've actually gotten back into rowing. I've got like a rowing machine. And so that's something that I've been doing, and it's more of I'm trying to get through it, but it's still not tapping into I love being competitive side of it.
What kind of rowing machine do you have?
It's a water rower.
Water rower. Okay. I asked, hydro is a big new one on the scenes.
It's a rip off of the one that I have. I don't know if you've ever seen House of Cards. But there's the main character has a particular row where it's water resistance, and it's very sleek and modern. I think it's a really beautiful machine, and so that's the one that I have.
Nice. And you said you kind of nailed down your nutritional side. Tell me about that. Everybody's always wondering what somebody else is doing. There's so many different methodologies these days. So what have you landed on?
I won't say that I tripped into intermittent fasting as something that I had been doing for probably the better part of 7 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. Not because I was intending to, but just because that's what my work days were like. And I've never really been a breakfast person, mm-hmm. which I know I've been scolded by so many people for so long about breakfast, and I'm just not going to hear it anymore.
I appreciate that.
So, I mean, I feel like it's what is it? President George H.W. Bush, he's like, I'm president of the United States. I don't have to eat broccoli anymore. Like, I'm a 40-year-old man. I'm just not going to be scolded that I haven't eaten breakfast regularly for the last 22 years.
Yeah.
But I think I've just tried to take a somewhat sensible approach around, we kind of know the nutritional pyramid. We know what is good going into our body. We know what is bad going into our body. We know that there are certain things that, from a moderation perspective, are okay. But if you start loading up, you're making really stupid decisions. As I think about like alcohol and things like that, making choices around like consumptive behaviors and things like that. So
yeah,
I don't know.
No scolding from here, because I also, as a past athlete and through all that programming, I don't eat breakfast. And part of it was just that I just don't care. It's just so easy not to. I enjoy my coffee, and I enjoy not doing it. And I look forward to it. I exercise in the morning. And I look forward to lunch. So I'm with you in that camp. Next one, family, friends, relationships. I know you're married, you've got kids. You've got, I know you're not a full-time pastor now, but congregation, folks that you're with there, you've got business. And so what are some of your healthy habits? And again, how have they evolved? And have you had to innovate for different reasons and different changes in what you do to keep those in a healthy place?
Yeah, they're regularly innovating, but I think over seasons of time. I think so. One of the keystone habits that my wife and I have is between Christmas and New Year's. So that week between Christmas and New Year's, we're both off work. And so we'll just have like really healthy, evaluative conversations, thinking through 5 different buckets. So our spiritual life, relational life, how we use our time, our physical bodies, in our relationships. Those are our finances. Those are the 5 things that we're kind of like evaluating. And we're thinking through what are the rhythms and practices that we have around that, both individually and as a family, and where adjustments that we need to make. And so one of the things that we've done that has not changed over, at least 15 years of us being together and married is we have a date night every single week. And now that's a grace-filled practice. Like, there are some weeks where that doesn't happen. Yeah. And with the pandemic, that is not something that we've been able to do every single week. But by and large, for 15 straight years, that's something that we have really prioritized. And so that is not something that like has changed a lot. That's just been something that's been locked into our calendar as something that we do. Now, what we do at that time has changed based on what our levels, quite frankly, our levels of energy have been. When you have small children, and then as those children grow, your levels of energy change, as well as the things that we're interested in as we grow and evolve as people and as a couple.
Okay. So what was the last date night? What'd you do?
The last date night, we tried. Well, we were trying to go to this really fun bowling alley, and then it apparently was just booked way too far in advance, and so we ended up just going out with a friend of ours who was in town, who is in the process of moving to where we live, not in our house, but like in our area, and so we just went out to a restaurant, and we went out to there's a new exhibit at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And so we went there. It's an exhibit called The Dirty South. That was the collision of like the visual arts and they call it the sonic arts that kind of emerged in the South in the last 50 years.
Interesting. Okay. Good to hear. Next one's mental. And, this is one that it's interesting. As of right now, we're recording, and I just happened to look. I'm late to the game, just started watching the Olympics last night. So I'm playing catch up, and we were watching gymnastics and whatever. And the big headlines today are,
Simone Biles.
Yes. And mental health. And I don't even know the whole story. I just kind of saw that, but looking at that, we're in a state right now where I know stats just came out. We're at I think an all-time high of suicides and whatnot. And that is an arena that I honestly haven't paid enough attention to. I tend to look at, this mental spoke as what are the things I'm doing to keep myself mentally sharp. and a good, strong mental state, man, we're in some crisis mode over here. And it feels like it's an area that we haven't tended to well as a culture. So with all that said, what's happening for you as you look at your own mental health and wellness?
Yes, I'm sure there's more I can be doing. But I will give two things that, maybe three things that I do and that we, like our family, does.
Yeah.
One is we're pretty ruthless about keeping a family Sabbath. And so sometimes that can be 24 hours. Every once in a while, it's 36 hours. And it is, we are completely unplugged from devices, and we're unplugged from work. And again, it is worth pointing out that I run a business, and my wife runs a very large business. And so we're not, like, those are things that we have fought for, but I think those are things that we have heavily prioritized, where we're disconnected from these constant forces that are around us, either online, as well as like just the demands of both being business runners, if you will. And the way that we really define that time is it's 24 hours. It's a 24-hour day of play. And so if it is not, if it is not life-giving, we don't do it. And so that means, like, Kevin, I absolutely hate yard work. I hate it. Now, I have friends who love it. Like, they just love it. And I think it's just the worst thing in the world. And so that doesn't give me an excuse not to do yard work. I just refuse to do it in that 24-hour period of time because it's not life-giving for me. Whereas I've got friends who it's the most life-giving thing in the world, gardening or mowing the grass, weed eating, whatever. They'll do it on that 24 hours. I'm just not going to do it then. But what that 24 hours of time has looked like has dramatically changed. As like when you have a 2-year-old, that looks really different. And then we have 3 kids, and we called it there was a time when all 3 were under the age of 5. And we called that the Valley of the Shadow of Death, because it was like this black hole of like just sucking life and energy out, but we were still committed to it and thinking through, what does a family Sabbath look like then? But now our kids are 12, 10, almost 8. And they're at this really sweet, incredibly fun age. And so what we do in that 24 hours looks wildly different than it did even 2 years ago. And so we're constantly adjusting for that. So that's one of the things that we do. I'm almost always reading a biography. For whatever reason, that I just, it puts me in this completely different headspace, where I can dream, I can think. I'm not trying to solve a problem, or I'm not trying to solve a narrative, which I think sometimes in novels, I find like I'm racing through to figure out where's this plot going. Whereas with a biography, it's just, I find myself in a different headspace. The third thing is, and I have not been able to do exactly like this during the pandemic. I think I will be able to get back to it in the fall. Is there's a very specific coffee shop that I go to early on Monday mornings, and I will plan out my week. And that starts with a mind dump of everything that I feel like I need to do, either from a business perspective or from a family to-do list perspective. And I just get it out of me. So from a mental place, I feel I never go into a week thinking I can't get everything done. Where I feel the most anxiety and mental fatigue is when I can't see it in front of me. Just dumping it out of me has an outsized effect on my productivity.
Well, we are kindred spirits, not only in that, but I hate yard work as well.
Hate it.
Man, I invite you to move out here. I live in a national forest, and you just don't have to do it, man. It's just kind of wild land, the forest. And I got out of it after being in Tennessee, where it was mowing 4 acres and whatnot. And it's one of the greatest things of my life. Name a biography or 2 that you've enjoyed recently. I
literally have one right here. It's called Endurance.
Yeah.
It is the biography of, I don't know if you've heard of Ernest Shackleton.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he was trying to get to the South Pole. I think he left in around like 1916. And his they were probably 50 miles away from the South Pole, and his ship, which was wooden, got caught between two ice flats, and then they grew together and it sunk the ship.
Wow.
And he's out, he's on what is essentially like a sheet of ice. They're not on land. And it's, how do you get home? And how do you not lose a single person along the way? And everyone survived. And it's a harrowing journey. And it was incredible. Like one of my favorite books of the last 5 years.
Okay. I wrote it down. I will order it following this show. Next is finances. Tell me about the financial area of your life.
I think we made a decision a couple of years ago this is a place of privilege for us to be in, where our income as a family was going up. And we made a decision that we were not going to change our level of spending as it related to our finances. And so some of it was, hey, there's a percentage that we put aside into savings. There's a percentage that we put aside into charitable giving, both from like what we give to our local church, as well as what we choose to give to other organizations that we care passionately about. And then there's some money where we're thinking about business opportunities that we want to invest in.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one that we're really thinking through right now. Is we do have some money set aside to really think through about what are some long-term investments we can make to create what we think is going to be like a diversified portfolio of investments.
Yeah.
That is both like very like a diversified portfolio as you think about the market, but then like investments in cryptocurrency, as well as investments in long-term like business opportunities.
Nice.
And so like I was meeting with our financial advisor to look at some like tax sheltering ideas tomorrow. And I actually just got an email a few minutes ago before our thing that was, we got to reschedule that. So we got to reschedule.
No, it's good to
I don't
hear
know if that's
though.
helpful or not, but that's how we're.
It is, because everybody's out there looking at what they do. You know, real estate is always, people are talking about, real estate, or am I going to invest in the stock market? And I think that we probably, under that, as far as the general populace, they don't think about businesses outside of, big corporate stocks and bonds, whatever out there. They don't think about the smaller businesses. That's my, of course, area of interest and exposure. Yeah. So no, it's cool to hear. So spiritual is the next spoke here. Tell me what you're doing there, and if that's evolved and why.
That one's always evolving, because, so as a former full-time pastor, one of the things that we talked about in our church a lot was peacetime rhythms and wartime rhythms. And I think most people, when they think about their spiritual practices and the things that they're developing rhythms for when life is going like the perfect version of it, like where everyone's healthy, no one's getting up in the middle of the night, I sleep well, my alarm goes off, I actually get up, everything is working exactly as it should be in my schedule. And we develop these peacetime rhythms. And so I do have these rhythms in my life where I've got 75 minutes, and I know it's like this choreographed thing that I've done for a long time that really helps me connect with the Lord and sets me in a particular direction for the day. But I'm going to say like that only happens 20% of the time, where I even have the available space for that thing to happen. And so what we've had to develop is like, look, when life feels like it is crumbling around us, do I have a 5-minute or 10-minute practice that at the baseline, I know I can do that? Because I don't care how crazy your life is, you have 10 minutes. Yeah. And so what am I going to do where it's not an all in or all out thing, which I feel like is what most people do as spiritual practices. I either do the best version of my practice or I do nothing. It's all in or all out. And so I think one of the things that we've really thought through is, what does it look like to have 10 minutes? And not to say like that's what I want, but like at the worst case scenario, there's a 10-minute version of something that I do. And so we've developed that. And then I've got that fully orbed thing that I do. And then recently we've been inviting, every time our kid turns 10, we've got some things that we do with them for a full year as we're kind of onlining them into what does it look like to have a life full of spiritual practice as well.
Matt, I really like your 10-minute window perspective. I have a friend, Aaron McHugh, who talks about that from a physical standpoint, trying to be well. He says, what does a pro do? He says, pro's going to always do something. And he had kind of a goal he was working for and realized amongst travel, there were so often times when he can't go do an hour workout. He can't even do 30 minutes. And he, had this night when he was late, it was raining, and he was just going to bag it. And instead he says, no, I'm going to be a pro. And he went out and did 1 mile. He ran a mile in the rain, came back, and at least he had something he could check down, even just for his mental state of saying, I invested in that. So I appreciate you saying that, because the spiritual one is one that I think is often, well, almost always not the most urgent thing screaming at us, in our lives. The next one's career. So, what have you done? You talked about former pastor, business owner now. What are some of the habits that you're doing and evolving with to keep your career where you want it?
That's a good question. What am I doing right now to keep my career where I want it? So one of the things that I do, and that we actually do this in our I do it for me personally, but then I also do it for the business that we're leading. Is a tool that we use called the 1414. And it's essentially like saying, hey, what is your life? And we'll say for career, what does your career life look like 10 years from now? And then if it's going to be that in 10 years, and that can be broad, and we should have that with pretty open hands, but it's sort of serving as a North Star. What are 4 different things that need to happen? This is like the next rung down in 3 years that are going to be pretty well defined. And so one of them, I'm just looking over to my wall where I've got this over here, is that within 3 years, we're going to have our core team established. Now that has already happened. So we can kind of check that one off. But for me to live out what it is that I felt like was the 10-year vision, I was going to have a core team of 5 to 7 that we'd established for the level of business that we were trying to run. And then you go down the next rung, and it's saying, okay, in 1 year, what is the most important win that I have to get done? If I'm going to judge success or failure by one thing, what is it going to be? And it's a defining goal that's going to serve as sort of an atomic goal for everything else, because it's going to touch so many different things. It's going to have an outsized effect on my vocational life. And then the last piece of it is, what are 4 goals that have to happen in the next 90 days in order for me to move towards that 1-year goal? And every 90 days, I'm recycling those 90-day goals.
Okay, that's an interesting one. I have not heard that. Where did that structure come from? Is that a resource?
Yeah, there was a guy that I worked with. His name is Will Mancini, and he developed it. He took a version of something from Patterson's Life Center planning.
Yeah.
And he adapted it. And it's something that they've developed. And so it's something that we use in our business, and it's something that I use for myself personally in my personal life.
Yeah. I'm aware of Patterson. Excellent. Well, actually another Patterson fan is Donald Miller. So our listeners will know Donald. That's where his life plan aspect came from. Well, the last one is personal and always of interest to me. And this is you mentioned before, you get a 24-hour Sabbath and your focus is fun. That's really what we're looking at here. Personal. What do you do for you, for Doug, for fun, for play, for hobby, for self-care, what falls in that basket?
I really love sports. And as my available time has drifted down mainly because of family, and then also because of just vocational stuff, it's centered mainly around the NBA. I still watch football as well, but it's mainly around the NBA. So I do a lot of, I watch a lot of the NBA, but then I really love, there are 3 or 4 podcasts that I listen to that are regularly just talking about things in the NBA. And then I also do that for pop culture. So specifically around movies and television. Podcasts have become like a really, that's been a place for me to disconnect from where my mind normally goes, which is around business and just business. And I think that's been really fun for me. I've tended to find that people use their slate of podcasts differently. And so for me, podcasts have been a place where it's about recreation and fun.
Interesting. So the Olympics are happening right now. You got any sports on tap that you're looking for there?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't care about the Olympics at all.
All right.
I wish I did, but my running theory is that the World Cup has replaced, on a global perspective, what the Olympics were in like 1984.
Yeah. Interesting. Hey, thank you. You gave me a bunch of notes. I got some books to read. I've got some, some programs to check out, the 1414, really good. And thanks for taking the time with us again for the behind the scenes look at your habits and how you're innovating them as well. It's inspiring. Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, sure thing.